Good morning, everybody. This is a live update on the potential impacts to Thanksgiving travel that could happen next week. We've got a couple of different storm systems to watch, and all of these are still quite conditional. I'm not sure exactly how these are going to break down, but I'm going to break down the uncertainty with each of these systems, each of these potential weather threats for Thanksgiving travel. Looking at this map right here, you can see a potential coastal storm that could impact portions of the northeastern U.S. into the Canada Maritimes. There is a blocking high that's going to set up just ahead of that trough that originates as an Alberta clipper. Actually, right about now through tomorrow, that storm system is going to come ashore across northern Alberta and then dive off to the southeast, amplifying over the Great Lakes, and then it develops a blocking high out ahead of it, just to the south of Greenland. A lot of warm advection as well ahead of that trough, and then it kind of pivots around each other. A lot of warm air wraps around that trough, and it looks like that's going to be a limitation that should prevent a big time snow event that could happen on Thanksgiving up there. The exception being maybe the higher terrain, the very tops of those mountains, maybe further north up into Labrador, could get some snowfall if there's not a ton of warm advection around that system. But that's a pretty substantial storm that's going to take shape across the northeast. Then there's also a trough that is forecast to amplify as it ejects across the southern plains. I was thinking that this system could have a severe weather threat around Thanksgiving from the southern plains and across portions of the mid-south. But now I'm not sure it's going to happen. I think it's kind of caught in the squeeze play between two more significant systems, that coastal storm across the northeast and also the atmospheric river event that's going to be taking shape across the North Pacific again tomorrow during Thanksgiving. But this is the main identifier. This is the forecast geopotential height anomaly at 500 millibars for next Thursday, which is Thanksgiving. You can see that tight gradient up there across the North Pacific. That's that new atmospheric river that's going to be forming. Then you can see that blue area across the south central U.S. I thought that was going to be a more substantial trough in some of the earlier forecast model runs, but now it looks like it's going to be kind of this large scale, relatively weak system. Not a ton of flow on the backside of that system to amplify that into the south central U.S. But all of this is largely related to the sea surface temperature anomaly pattern across portions of the North Pacific, and you can see that PDO Horseshoe, as we call it, Pacific Decadal Oscillation Horseshoe. That's that blue inverted horseshoe. Basically, the horseshoe's oriented along the west to east axis there. These are relatively cool waters as well, and you can see it's all encapsulating this warm water in the middle. That's the North Pacific Oscillation, or the NPO. And right there along that gradient is usually where a consolidated polar front jet stream likes to form with these types of setups. And that's why we have this atmospheric river that has been directed across portions of the Pacific Northwest. British Columbia absolutely getting hammered by flooding from this semi-permanent atmospheric river that sets up right along this gradient of these sea surface temperature anomalies here. And there are positive feedbacks that are baked into this as well. So you keep getting rain, you get a lot of cloudiness here on the north side of that jet, on the north side of that atmospheric river. You get more negative, more cold anomalies up there in the sea surface temperature. But you can also see these Kelvin waves even in the sea surface temperature anomaly patterns. And what happens is you have this La Nina that's going down here in the tropical Pacific, and it just feeds this PDO horseshoe with cool waters through Kelvin wave propagation. This is the subtropical branch of that PDO horseshoe, and this is the extratropical branch, the North Pacific branch of that PDO horseshoe. And this is one pattern here, definitely has a seasonal evolution. It is indirectly related to El Nino and La Nina cycles down in the tropical Pacific. But right now we've got a cold PDO horseshoe that favors these atmospheric rivers pumping into the western U.S. and also the formation of western U.S. troughs, which is favorable for severe weather across the Great Plains and portions of the Mid-South. And I think that's what we're going to see during the springtime months. We're going to see likely a continuation of this active fall season for severe weather. So this is the GFS model, and this is the 6C GFS. This model's all over the place. It's very reckless looking this far in advance, especially when you're looking at those surface features that might happen. This is the 500 millibar analysis, and if you know how to read these mid and upper tropospheric charts, it's a little bit easier to look in advance. And so this is the beginning of that coastal storm. It starts off as an Alberta clipper. This is the forecast Friday morning, so later on this week. I think today's Wednesday, and looks like Friday this system comes ashore here across far northern Alberta. That's why these are called Alberta Clippers. You can see quite a bit of flow here on the south side of that Alberta Clipper. It's still digging, increasing in amplitude. And it also has a secondary system, kind of an extension of that trough axis down into the western, down across the western U.S. And so then we step forward with time. There's a lot of uncertainty as to how this thing ejects, and especially how it evolves along the east coast, so the interaction of that blocking high. But there you can see that Alberta Clipper diving south through the weekend toward the Great Lakes region, and then it really amplifies. And there is quite a bit of agreement here with the amplification of this system over the northern Great Lakes by early next week. A lot of cold weather, cold unsettled weather over the relatively warm Great Lakes waters there is also going to set the stage for lake effect showers, maybe even some lake effect snow showers over some of these areas across the Great Lakes, depending on how the surface thermodynamics set up. But now you can start to see this ridge building a bit upstream. So as this system amplifies over the Great Lakes region, you get warm advection downstream, you get increasing heights, you start to get this ridge that begins to form, and eventually that becomes a blocking high downstream, just downstream, just to the south of Greenland. But this is early next week, the system amplifying over the eastern U.S. This is when it's going to be cold over the eastern U.S. So you definitely want to enjoy the warm weather that you're getting out here throughout the Appalachians, doing some leaf peeping out there as well, I suggest. And then you can see the back system as well coming in. We're going to monitor that for the potential of severe weather. And this is just the 6Z GFS, and the 12Z GFS is coming in right now. But you still want to look at more of those ensembles, assessment of spread. We're going to do that coming up here as well relative to the GFS. The European model also shows this coastal storm developing, not quite as much of a blocking high. And a lot of people in the Northeast might look at this and think, oh, we're going to get a Thanksgiving snowstorm. I totally understand. As a weather weenie myself, I get amped anytime I see patterns like this. But I do encourage some caution when you're looking at this, because the low-level thermodynamics is just not really showing a big Arctic air intrusion here that is going to be necessary for a big-time snowstorm. You do have this blocking high here to the south of Greenland that should allow this system to slow down, amplify, and develop a coastal storm type of a situation. And there's a lot of spread in the surface reflection of this upper level trough, all the way basically from the Canadian Maritimes to an offshore type of a situation. But we do have the long-range models hinting at a stagnated pattern here across the Northeast, which is a pretty favorable pattern for a snowstorm and a coastal storm up there, but we just don't have that big Arctic air intrusion. In fact, we have a lot of warm air advection around this system, wrapping around the north side of this trough into the northeastern U.S., and so that's going to be the limiting factor here. Largely is going to be that warm air, the low-level thermodynamics, potentially preventing a snowstorm from happening. And then we have this kicker system. It has a bit of a positive tilt to it, not an incredibly high amplitude trough. There, some of the earlier models were showing the potential of severe weather across portions of the southern plains and the mid-south. Definitely have to keep an eye on that trough as well. But in general, I basically see this central U.S. storm system trapped between the coastal storm here over the Northeast. You've got this blocking high just offshore of Greenland as well. And then you've got an atmospheric river that's setting up across the northern Pacific once again, right along that gradient of those sea surface temperature anomalies. Definitely at least indirectly related to that cold PDO horseshoe, which is indirectly related to the La Nina conditions across the tropical Pacific. But you can see that this trough in the central U.S. just has a lot of weak flow around it. Not a ton of flow on the backside that you'd like to see with an amplifying, intensifying trough that would be ejecting from the Four Corners region. But I have been watching this closely for severe weather and even storm chase potential. But this is just a little bit too stagnant of a pattern across the Northeast. And then you have this dynamic atmospheric river situation setting up across the northern Pacific, which does in general favor the development of this western U.S. trough, but just not a ton of flow around this. And then you get a little bit of a high, a little bit of some subtropical ridging downstream. This stagnated pattern is definitely setting the stage for a big rain event here across portions of the Texas Hill Country through the south central U.S. There is a chance of severe weather, especially if we get a little bit less blocking across the Northeast, less of a stagnated pattern up there. you can start to see some flow starting to organize on the back side of that trough, and that's going to be on Thanksgiving Day, and that should be enough to amplify that system and cause it to kick a little bit off to the east. And there is a chance that there could be some severe weather across portions of the Mid-South, maybe on the evening of Thanksgiving, maybe on Friday as well. But this is a weakening storm system caught between two more substantial patterns with this blocking across the Northeast, this atmospheric river across portions of the North Pacific. And so without a big high amplitude type of a system with a big jet ski jump type of a jet, upper jet feature, you really get a relatively weak kind of pinched off low-level jet here that's really focused over Louisiana down into coastal Texas. It is possible that there could be tornadic activity down here, Houston, the I-10 corridor across portions of Louisiana, maybe even further east of that, but then the system weakens as it ejects further east across portions of the Mid-South. And so I do think that there is a chance, a lower end chance of some low end severe weather with this front that's going to be moving through the Mid-South. We're definitely going to have to keep a pretty close eye on that pattern. I just don't see an outbreak of severe weather there with that type of a setup. We'll just, and you can kind of see this low level jet a little bit pinched off. There are 60s dew points, though, that do lift north into portions of southwestern Dixie and definitely hugging the northern Gulf of Mexico coastline there, but you don't get a rapid lift of a warm front all the way up into the Ohio River Valley that you'd expect with a more dynamic, higher amplitude system. So at least the latest model runs, I don't think that there's going to be a big severe weather event to chase on Thanksgiving Day, but it is still subject to change. And this is the 12Z models that are starting to come out now, 12Z GFS. We also want to assess a little bit of some ensemble action here as well. And the blue, naturally you'd expect to see a low standard deviation amongst the different ensemble members. And so this is the best way to forecast that long range uncertainty. When you start to get these lighter blues and especially the yellows and the oranges, that means that there's a lot of forecast uncertainty. And so that's why it's not surprising. The near-term forecast is all blue. A relatively low spread between the different ensemble members. And then as you go out with forecast hour, this is at 54 hours, you can start to see the evolution of this Alberta Clipper over the weekend here. A little bit of spread, not a huge standard deviation amongst the surface reflection of that Alberta Clipper as it dives through the Canadian prairies here as well. That's going to be over this weekend. And still quite a bit of forecast model confidence in the amplification of this Alberta Clipper over the northern Great Lakes and in the surface reflection of that Alberta Clipper as well over the northern Great Lakes. And as that system amplifies, you start to get the formation of an anticyclone downstream as well. And then through early next week into the middle portions of next week, that's as that system continues to amplify across the northeastern U.S., but then you start to see that model uncertainty with the surface features, the surface low associated with that trough, anywhere from the Canadian Maritimes all the way down to being offshore to a couple powerful surface low reflections as well over portions of New England. So there is going to be a coastal storm out here, but the exact track and the surface reflection will drive you insane if you're looking at it this far out. And as you go out into next week to the middle of next week, forecast uncertainty continues to increase here across portions of the Northeast. And you can also see the development of a surface low, a Colorado cyclone here, southeast Colorado over portions of the Southern Plains. And that's also a decent surface low there. Some of the earlier models were even showing maybe pulling down some cold air on the backside of that system. That's probably not going to happen. There is a chance of some severe weather out ahead of this. Definitely more of a chance of some rain and some cloudiness out there. But that trough, just not a very impressive trough ejection, in my opinion, from the southern U.S. And it seems certainly like the European model has a little bit better of a handle on that middle trough. It's a little bit of a weaker system trapped between two more significant storm systems like that coastal low. Trying to work this 12Z model here. See if we can get it. This is the pivotalweather.com website here. And there we go. We'll dive down a little bit to this national view here. This is the 12Z models. And you're not going to see this pattern very much throughout this winter into the spring. This type of a ridge trough pattern across the United States. I think that we're going to see the tendency for a western U.S. trough to dominate throughout this winter and into the spring. And that's why I think there's going to be a relatively active spring of 2022, similar to how this active fall season transpired across the southern plains. 500 millibar winds here. So this shows you the evolution of this eastern U.S. bowling ball through early next week. And that's going to bring this big time pattern shift. We got very warm temperatures out here across the eastern U.S. You can see this Vortmax dominating here across the northeastern Great Lakes. Warm advection upstream from that. We then get that blocking high that forms through the middle portion of next week. But you get a lot of warm air that's going to be wrapping around this system as it closes off. You really need that Arctic air to kind of be in place ahead of a pattern like this to get a mega snowstorm that might happen. Could definitely happen later on this winter, as is often the case here. The Gulf Stream pumping warm water just offshore here of the northeastern U.S. So you do get the tendency for a pretty substantial temperature gradient to form there across the northeastern U.S. Just a breeding ground for these big-time coastal storms. Well, look at that thing close off. It does get a little bit weird, a little bit further offshore here with the latest GFS model. But all weather weenies are going to be glued here to the ensembles, to the individual operational runs, looking at the surface reflection as well to a trough like this. But it does have that blocking high to the south of Greenland that should slow down and buckle this pattern a bit. That's related to the North Atlantic Oscillation, or the NAO, as we call it. But then you've got this system here across northern Mexico. That's going to be the system across the southern plains that we need to keep an eye on. And that'll be for Thanksgiving. But look at how much further south that system is into northern Mexico. More of a closed system rather than that weaker, higher amplitude open wave. And that bowling ball of an upper level storm system dives down into northern Mexico. Upstream across the Texas Hill Country, this looks like a pattern that could favor flash floods across Flash Flood Alley there, central southern Texas. And eventually, as this bowling ball moves across the southern plains and the Mid-South, that should bring with it that threat of flooding rainfall and maybe severe weather. But it all depends on if that coastal warm front is able to migrate a little bit inland. Right now, the long-range models are not showing the development of a big-time trough, but it does look like this 12Z model is a bit more of a bowling ball with that trough in the middle. That 6Z run, the 0Z run, and the 6Z run last night were favoring a little bit less of that little bit lower amplitude of a system. And as you can see, I'm having just a little bit of internet problems here pulling up those models from the pivotalweather.com website. But this is a breakdown of these different severe weather threats that could impact next week Thanksgiving travel. You've got that atmospheric river event across the northern Pacific that is at least indirectly related to that negative PDO. And you also have that coastal storm that's going to evolve across portions of the northeastern U.S. Surface reflection of that system is still highly uncertain. That surface low could be anywhere from Labrador to offshore, and it all depends kind of on the timing of that buckling action that's going to happen with the closing off of that northeastern trough, the blocking high developing downstream up just offshore of Greenland there, kind of buckling that pattern. Basically, I see it as the jet stream as kind of a river that flows across the northern U.S., southern Canada this time of year. And if you dam up that river across the northern Atlantic, it's going to lead to buckling. And that's what's happening is the dam is applied. That dam is that area of high pressure, that ridge just to the south of Greenland. That causes the pattern to buckle, pivot a little bit. You get warm advection that wraps all the way around that closed low. It does look like the low-level thermodynamics don't really favor a big-time snowstorm at this time across the Northeast, but it is possible some of those mountainous areas could certainly see some snowfall from that and a lot of wind. Definitely some disruptive travel that could be happening out there as well. So let me shift gears here a little bit. Pull up a different model website. This is the 12Z run that we're looking at here. Just dominating with this high pressure across the eastern U.S. through this weekend. Incredible weather out there. Thinking about riding my bike as well. Pumping out a couple of Flex Seal videos as well on our deployment of the Surginators. And let me shrink my head a little bit so that you can see that blocking high. But this is definitely green mode here. I reserve red mode, code red, for when there is life-threatening severe weather that's happening, for breaking down a tornado that's in progress, if a tornado outbreak's happening, breaking down radar. Of course, code red is also reserved for that storm chasing mode. But really kind of the squeeze play, the timing of that buckling of the jet there with that coastal storm, the closing off of that upper level low. That thing originates as an Alberta clipper, a relatively low amplitude Alberta clipper, northern Alberta, Friday, end of this week, through the weekend, and then it dives south and then amplifies over the Great Lakes. You get a lot of warm advection upstream. Positive feedbacks that will happen with that warm advection through the column leads to height rises and the development of a downstream blocking high. And definitely encouraging some blocking, some buckling of that jet across the northeast. So I do anticipate some unsettled weather there across the northeastern U.S. With that system and that buckling that's going to be happening. So let's shimmy on over to the tropicaltidbits.com website here, looking at some of the surface features here from the operational 12Z GFS. We were just looking at some of those ensembles to assess uncertainty. And there you can see that snow that breaks out across central and northern Alberta. That's going to be what's going to encourage this pattern shift, that Alberta clipper that dives south over top of this ridge that temporarily dominates the western U.S. It is temporary because we do have a cold PDO horseshoe out there that is going to encourage the formation of a western U.S. trough, these atmospheric river events, as well into the Pacific Northwest. And then it amplifies, and then you start to get a surface pressure reflection toward the latter half of the weekend as the system amplifies over the Great Lakes. This is on Sunday evening out here, and you start to get cold advection on the backside of this Alberta clipper, bringing in some lake effect snow showers, lake enhanced snow showers as well across the upper peninsula and northern Wisconsin. Rain snow line still north of the international border there, ahead of this feature, of course. And there is quite strong agreement on the amplification of this Alberta clipper over the Great Lakes. So I think that this is going to be a pretty substantial lake effect event Sunday evening here, especially across the higher terrain there. The Porcupine Mountains are going to get hammered across the western upper peninsula of Michigan. Some synoptic scale snow as well, picking up strength over the very warm waters there of Lake Superior this time of year. And then it starts to change over to snow across the higher country there of the northern lower peninsula of Michigan, back toward the Gaylord area there. That's kind of the snow belt there of northern Michigan. It's going to require that higher terrain to get that snow. Probably will be a cold rain right along the immediate shoreline there into Traverse City into Monday morning. But that cold front's going to be marching southeast with this, ushering in a big-time pattern shift across the eastern U.S. Temperatures are going to plummet through early next week, and big lake effect rain here, northwesterly flow on the backside of this system. It closes off a little bit too far east to get westerly flow lake effect here over the Great Lakes, but we are going to get strong northwesterly flow over Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, even snow across the Appalachians. Snowshoes going to get hammered, lake enhanced orographic lift type snowfall there. So the lake effect is definitely a higher likelihood. You could get a double fetch event here through Monday off of Lake Huron, and then picking up even more moisture as well over central Lake Erie, and then dumping it over the higher terrain there just inland from the lake, northwestern Pennsylvania. Definitely are going to get some orographic lift there over eastern West Virginia across the central Appalachians. Even some lake effect here across the mountains of North Carolina on Tuesday out here. So definitely a big pattern shift into the early part of next week. Cold temperatures out there. You're trying to get this coastal storm forming as that pattern buckles. A lot of uncertainty, though, with the surface reflection of the system. A lot of warm advection out ahead of it as well. A lot of rain, a lot of wind, a lot of lake effect and orographically induced snow showers on the backside. And this is all on Tuesday. But that system will just hover around as an upper level low closes off there with marginal low level thermodynamics for snowfall. Mainly the mountains are going to be getting snow. Maybe those ski resorts here that just have opened across northern Vermont, northern Maine as well, and the Canadian Maritimes inland a little bit up there near Labrador. But we're still just looking at surface features that are going to change dramatically between now and then. But you get this substantial surface reflection just hovering around out here over the open waters offshore of Nova Scotia. A lot of warm advection wrapping all the way around this closed low. So you have a lot of warm air wrapping all the way into the northeastern U.S. Big wind up here, though, Wednesday evening. Big time wind across coastal Maine, down through Cape Cod as well. Big northerlies here. Temperatures cooling quite a bit. And then you get the surface reflection now way down to the south across northern Mexico, kind of setting the stage for that heavy rain event across Flash Flood Alley and eventually expanding across coastal Texas during Thanksgiving Day. Looks like the Texas Hill Country could see some flooding out there with this bowling ball of a system that now has it diving all the way down into northern Mexico. But definitely hinting at some heavy rain across the Texas Hill Country Thanksgiving night, and kind of a weaker trough ejection, keeping most of that unstable air offshore over the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe some water spouts here, though, right along the immediate Gulf of Mexico coastline, southern Louisiana, southern Mississippi, Alabama, maybe into the Florida Panhandle. Friday, Saturday, looks like next weekend. So that's really what it looks like here overall for Thanksgiving. Unsettled up in the Northeast. And then finally, you get enough cold air here next weekend to start to get a decent snow event across some of the interior here of Quebec, down through interior, northeastern Canada as well. And then you still just kind of get this unsettled snow shower activity across the mountains of New England. So I don't think we're going to get a big coastal storm here across the northeastern U.S., but there is the potential for a coastal storm out there. And then look at that atmospheric river come ashore here again across portions of the Pacific Northwest. Definitely not a break in sight there, and that includes British Columbia. That's battling a lot of the flooding out there as well with that atmospheric river. Some burn scars out there as well on the western side of western slope there of the Canadian Rockies. So that's what we're looking at for Thanksgiving weather next week. I do think there's going to be unsettled weather, basically west to east across North America. But I don't think there's going to be a big outbreak of severe weather. I don't think there's going to be a massive snowstorm across portions of the Northeast, but a coastal storm with unfavorable thermodynamics for snow can still have impacts. Flooding, big time wind as well up there across the Northeast with that tight pressure gradient, and a very stagnant pattern there across the Northeast. So that blocking high downstream, the low closing off across the Northeast. It's going to just proliferate that bad, unsettled, below normal type of temperatures there for Thanksgiving. So that's your Thanksgiving pattern here. I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. We're also working on science out here too. I've got the Gravitrons. I just got these batteries that arrived for the Gravitron network. It took a little bit longer with the supply shortages with the Gravitron batteries there. But that's going to be that ground probe network that you may have seen in the Team Dominator science mission that we've been sharing, kind of that network of ground-based probes. Those are the Gravitron network. We're also going to be launching balloons in the open environment out ahead of these storms, shooting rockets into the tornadoes as well that will act as Lagrangian drifters. And all of this is thanks to the Facebook supporter community. So please come check us out. If it weren't for Facebook supporters, I wouldn't be doing these live briefings. I wouldn't be streaming live all the time. And I'm going to be starting to do things to benefit exclusively the Facebook supporter community. And I do plan a live Q&A. That's going to be happening this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. Our first live Q&A exclusively for Facebook supporters in quite some time. But we can discuss this Thanksgiving pattern. We can discuss our plans for the Team Dominator Science, a full court press on social media live streaming for that Team Dominator mission that's going to be reinvigorated next spring, now that the Dominator 3 can cross the border from Canada. Our Canadian friends are going to be able to come south and storm chase in the U.S., so I'm very excited about that as well, our science mission. And I'm going to be publishing our rocket paper as well, submitting that for publication, and all of that is also due to Facebook supporters making Team Dominator Science happen. So thank you, supporters, for riding in my passenger seat over these last couple of years. It's been a crazy couple of years chasing down these storms during our pivot more towards social media from traditional television. But thank you, everybody, for being along for the ride with Team Dominator. Never stop chasing.